Let's discuss the pod. Let's start with Houston. Craig, you even mentioned this last week. Oklahoma, with what they have, and Houston has struggled. We know about the loss to UNLV. OU could have absolutely lost that game.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was, I thought you said last week that there was no chance in hell that they could lose to Houston, which I would have agreed with. And in fact, I did. What happened here? And UH maybe rallied the troops, or is Oklahoma a mess?
I think it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I think, I did say that. I didn't think it was going to be close, but Oklahoma got way more fight than they bargained for. So I was wrong on that account. And I really thought that I was going to be sitting here going, hey, Paul, how's the karma? I think you handed it over to me because, here I was talking all this trash about Florida State. And I know multiple losses are coming for Oklahoma. I said that before I started even talking about Florida State. Like, my expectations rolling into this season weren't that they were going to go, 12-0 in their first year in the SEC. But I definitely didn't anticipate them struggling as much as they did with Houston. So that was surprising to me. I think that on the one hand, if you're Oklahoma, just get them out of the way. Like, you have some major issues. That offensive line is very much a work in progress. You've got some good things on defense, but Jackson Arnold's just not that guy that he was made out to be ever since he was recruited, basically. Like, he's been talked about like he's Quinn Ewers or like he's Arch Manning.
Dylan Gabriel was basically asked to leave, right?
Like, hey, it's time for the Jackson Arnold show is what they told Dylan Gabriel, which I get. Dylan Gabriel's not the end-all be-all, but he was pretty good. So I think a combination of a guy who's just not that guy yet and an offensive line that's just not where it needs to be is definitely complicating matters. And they're a little bit out of sorts and not nearly where I thought they would be in terms of competing with Houston. So that was a reality check. But I also think it speaks very well to Houston that, I mean, look, Willie Fritz coached one game, and it was a bad game, but I never expected the locker room was going to quit on him. I do think, though, it was a really great showing that they did seem to rally, as you put it, and showed up the way that they did. I think that was very encouraging. I didn't expect them to fold after a game, but they very easily could have walked in and just expected to get their asses kicked, and instead they came out to kick some ass, and they nearly did it. And so I gave them a lot of credit. I think that's a great sign for Houston that they responded to week one the way that they did and played Oklahoma so tough. Now, is Oklahoma not as good as we thought? Probably, but I don't think that matters at all in terms of Houston's response. That was a really, really good thing to see if you're a Cougars fan and Willie Fritz.
And Houston will host crosstown rival Rice coming up on Saturday night on ESPN+. All right, the other teams. BYU started the weekend with the win at SMU in Dallas. Dave Wilson had that huge article about SMU, like, oh, blank, here come the billionaires. It's a hell of an article. A lot of good background, and Phil Bennett was quoted in that. He'll join us today at 5. But that's a nice win for BYU. When you're BYU, Colorado, Baylor, and some of those teams right there on that, we don't know who they are. Every single win you can get is a good one, no matter who it's against. And in this case, on the road against a team that was kind of getting a little bit of hype.
Well, first of all, SMU has quarterback problems right now, and I didn't expect that. I thought Preston Stone would be better, but Garrett mentioned earlier to me that he was able to watch the whole game and said it looked like he was standing in cement when he was back there. So they put in Kevin Jennings to get some mobility, but they still didn't get a lot out of the offense there at SMU. And BYU, the game was ugly, but guess what? That's what they needed it to be. And so they embraced the ugly nature of it and won the game. And that's a huge win for Kalani Sitake. Can build some momentum. Again, their schedule is tough, just like everybody else's, but that was one I don't think most people had them going in on. But here you see, again, there's not a lot of separation between a BYU and an SMU right now. And BYU won that game by being tough and physical and making SMU play the way that BYU wanted the game to go.
Yeah, that SMU quarterback situation is definitely something to watch. Preston Stone, I don't know what's happened. I thought he was going to be way better than he's been. I didn't anticipate that he would be like in doubt as even being the guy. I thought he'd be the guy and they'd sprinkle Kevin Jennings in or whatever, but like he's just not played well enough. And I don't know what is causing that exactly. So that's something that SMU's got to get figured out is the quarterback situation. But this was an ugly game. I mean, 18-15. Credit to BYU for rolling in there and just being, a couple plays better ultimately. But you look at both these teams in terms of offense. BYU was 2 of 13 on third down, but they were 2 of 3 on fourth down. So he had a couple of calls that they converted that were huge in terms of this game unfolding. SMU was 3 of 16 on third down. Now they were 2 of 4 on fourth down. So it's just one of those games. But when BYU needed to make some plays, they were able to do so. And 3 turnovers apiece. It was just,
Well, we were doing a game, and there was nothing going on offensively.
No, it's just an ugly game. Think about those third down percentages and the amount of turnovers. There's, not crazy amount of penalties, but there was enough that this was just really sloppy. But I think the big thing was holding SMU to kicking field goals when they got into the red zone. Like, this is a potentially explosive offense, and you were able to limit them and force them into some field goal situations. I thought one of the things that Rhett Lashley mentioned was that BYU threw some different fronts at them that they were not expecting. So just in terms of the coaching matchup, Kalani Sitake and company threw them for a little bit of a loop that took them a little while to get adjusted to. And so that was just good coaching there that obviously had an impact on this game and gave SMU something they weren't expecting. But I think just converting on those couple of fourth downs were huge for BYU. I think SMU had a big fumble. You had big stops when you needed them, and you managed to get around what was not a great performance from your offense. So win however you need to win. It was certainly an ugly win, but it was a great win because they're 2-0.
Yep.
They weren't expecting to be 2-0 necessarily. They went on the road. They beat an ACC team who otherwise we would not have heard the end of it from their fans. If you're a Big 12 folk, you would have seen incessant SMU trash talk after that win, and instead BYU got the dub. So that was, I think, important just in terms of the online feel of the conference in these power versus power matchups. But, it was just an ugly win that they happened to be the slightly better team. I think you still got to really wonder about Jake Rotzloff. I thought we'd see a little bit of Gary Bohannon in some packages. I thought he teased that, but we never saw Gary. So I don't know. I think you're going to have to see Gary at some point the way this is trending, but they're 2-0, so it is what it is.
And they play at Wyoming. It's a late game at Wyoming this week. By the way, one other BYU note on the side, Puka Nacua, who had that great year last year, is on the injured reserve list. He'll miss at least 4 games, a sprained PCL. So after the great year, he's going to be sidelined with a knee injury that he aggravated in their opening game against Detroit. So they play at Wyoming.
So they should be 3-0. Wyoming's not very good. So they should be 3-0, halfway to bowl eligibility. And I think that's a great start if you're Kalani Sitake and you're one of the lesser talked about teams into the conference or rolling into the season this year.
Now let's look at Cincinnati. They play this week or Saturday early morning at Miami of Ohio. They had Pittsburgh dead to rights. And I'm watching that score, and I'm kind of every once in a while getting on Gamecast. They got away from the dude that was having the game running the football. It seemed like I don't give Pittsburgh credit for coming back, but that would have been a very salty win for Cincinnati.
Yeah, that was a bummer that they lost that one there right at the end and, got away from what was working. But I do think you see a more contained Cincinnati team. They're not they didn't look as much of an adventure as they were last year, and not in a good way. Hopefully there's good things ahead for them, but that was a hell of a way to lose a game after you were in control for most of it.
Kiner finished with 100+ yards, and I saw a stat from Chad Brendel in the fourth quarter. He got 3 touches. Now I don't know if that means they didn't have the ball quite a bit, but he had himself a pretty good game. He's at 200 yards over 2 games, and they just couldn't finish. 149 yards, 20 carries. But it seemed like they got away from it, and Pittsburgh ended up having a nice fourth quarter.
Pittsburgh had a great fourth quarter, and that was the story of this game. Cincinnati had no business losing this game. This was an awful loss for Scott Satterfield. I don't know how much they got away from Corey Kiner. Corey Kiner's definitely a name to know in the league. He's one of the better players, and he's certainly one of Cincinnati's better players, and he had a really good day. But I thought Brendan Sorsby also had a pretty good day for the most part, and then suddenly they were just unable to finish out drives, and you had a situation where Pittsburgh and Eli Holstein just made some big plays. For example, you had a 4th and 3 turn into a 38-yard touchdown. So next thing you know, it's 27-19. Cincinnati gets the ball back. They go 4 plays, 7 yards, give the ball back. 7 plays, 94 yards, touchdown. Pitt's all of a sudden 27-25, get another stop, and then a big gain on their last drive, and then they're kicking a field goal to win the game. And that was a complete unraveling. They had no business losing that game, the way that they were in control with the score, the way that it was, but they couldn't do anything on offense. And if you want to attribute that to not enough Kiner or whatever, that's fine, but Sorsby cooled off, and then Holstein and Pitt made some huge plays, and the Cincinnati defense just got gashed at the wrong time and the wrong moments, and it cost them dearly. So that's one that, if you want to be a Cincinnati fan, start circling the wagons and calling for Satterfield's head. I think it's still too early to do that, but that's the type of loss that sets you up for that, because they shouldn't have lost that game. So credit to Pitt for making some big plays, getting stops, and then having some big, large chunks of yardage, like the 4th down touchdown. Like, that's okay. You give up a conversion, but you don't give up a nearly 40-yard touchdown on 4th down. And that's what they did. So that was one of a handful of mistakes that cost them very dearly. And I don't know, that might be the difference in them making a bowl game at the end of the year or not. But I do think Cincy is slightly better than I expected. It was great to see Dante Corleone come back and play. So we were wondering, like, how long, once he was cleared, would he need to get back into action, and he was ready this weekend. So that was a real positive. But yeah, they completely blew it in the 4th quarter.
Yeah, Pittsburgh now 2-0. Cincinnati drops to 1-1, and as I mentioned, they have Miami of Ohio, who I believe last year won the MAC, and that game will be on the road on ESPN.
Well, and that's got some rivalry to it. So I mean, that's not a game that I think you just sleepwalk. If you're Cincinnati, you got to be really careful about that one.
Yep, 21-point deficit. Pittsburgh winning 28-27. And then a conference game in Fort Worth at Amon Carter. TCU at home against Gus Malzahn, the Knights. And there's some conference games this week, including that one on Friday between both Arizona and K-State ranked, which we'll get to at some point this week, of course. But this is fun. This will be interesting to watch what UCF can do on the road, getting away from the bounce house against TCU.
Yeah, I'm curious about how they are against a team that is on their level or above, UCF. But KJ Jefferson was better this week. He was very efficient, 12 of 15. They didn't ask him to do a whole lot. He didn't have to do a whole lot. RJ Harvey, when you have that guy, it's just kind of like, all right, go ahead. And they rolled past Sam, which not a surprise. This week will be a lot tougher. Now, if they do go into TCU and win, and I don't think TCU's, really where they want to be just yet after struggling at Stanford, and then they beat Long Island, but you're supposed to beat Long Island. I don't know. I mean, this will be a nice test for both of them, because both of them haven't really seen anybody yet.
UCF, Craig, is averaging about 400 yards rushing a game, so that takes some of the pressure off KJ. They're going to have to throw it with him a little bit, but they are, of course, they beat Sam Houston State, as Paul, you mentioned they're supposed to, with all due respect to what they do. But they're 2-0, and a good test for them to go on the road at Fort Worth against TCU.
Yeah, and they'll be underdogs, because I think TCU right now looks like the better overall team, but it should be a really interesting game, just because, we'll finally see these conference teams clash and start to know really what's what, and not just what we gathered or gleaned from the preseason or non-conference schedule. So yeah, to actually see UCF, TCU, I think 2 teams that you find sort of in the middle to upper tier of the league. Now we'll have some separation and know a lot more about both these teams, because I don't think you learned a lot about UCF in this game, other than they took Sam Houston seriously, which they should, and which I said last week, if you remember, Gus Malzahn, coming from where he's come from, I thought he would treat Sam Houston very seriously, and he did. He even said as much, that he has a lot of respect for them, and they took it serious. But the game was pretty in hand pretty quickly. I mean, it was a no-doubter at halftime. It was not a no-doubter after the first quarter, but they were already up 14-0. And then by halftime, they were up, double scores. And you knew what the end result was going to be ultimately. But I did think this was once again a showcase for this run game. So how TCU defends RJ Harvey for starters, but then here comes Miles Montgomery. And then, oh, wait, here's Penny Boone, who are still kind of getting his feet wet and getting him acclimated. But, here's late in the game, and you think, you want to see fresh. Here comes Penny Boone. We're going to start handing him the rock. So here's KJ Jefferson. We'll throw him into the mix as well. So their running game really is something pretty nasty, and how the league's able to defend that, I'm very much looking forward to. But through the air, I thought KJ Jefferson had a better game. He was improved from the first week. I think it's a matter of just getting comfortable for him. And the more he plays in this offense, the more comfortable and better he should be. But it was definitely a step forward from week number 1 when he definitely had a very poor start to his UCF career. This was much better. Kobe Hudson got involved, which is good to see because it wasn't all just about the running game. He had a 100-yard game. And I think you feel pretty good about where they are, especially running, and especially if KJ Jefferson can continue to improve. Colton Boomer in the kicking game's a weapon for them. So there's a lot to like there.
We haven't really learned much about them because they played New Hampshire and Sam Houston State. But you know what? They won. They took care of business. They blew both of them out. So that Long Island against TCU, and we saw them against Baylor, what was it, last year. 34 carries, 59 yards. So you have the UCF putting up massive numbers on the ground, and then TCU just completely smoked Long Island, which was not a surprise. But 34 carries, 59 yards means there was nothing. And so that will be interesting to see UCF in that run game against TCU and the defense with Sonny Dykes and company at 2-0 and escaping with that win against Stanford a couple of weeks ago, which they did, though. It was a nice win for them to come back and win on a late Friday night game.